Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where on this podcast, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. In today's podcast, we have both a patient, a former patient, and a fellow physical therapist who is in the running space. You may have seen him on Instagram. He has a platform that is, very, very loved on social media, big following. And so we're going to talk about running and then also his personal experience with headaches and migraines. This is Dr. Casey Guthmiller. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jono. Appreciate that introduction.
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. So what I want to start off with is just your personal journey with migraines. Can you give people your background and into what you experienced, as you are personally someone that's gone through this?
Yeah, for sure. So headaches have always been kind of a part of my story growing up. I would say that migraines specifically didn't start until about college days, which led me to explore various medical options. I was seeing a lot of different doctors, getting MRIs. And I remember feeling frustrated because most of my options were focused on managing symptoms with medication rather than identifying the root cause. And so obviously super grateful for modern medicine and the ability to relieve migraine pain. It's been amazing. But when I found Novera and when I worked with you, I really appreciated the focus on seeking out the root cause and really to hopefully try to reduce the reliance on medication. So I ended up seeing you, which kind of led to you introducing me to the tongue tie scene, and I didn't even know what a tongue tie was. But long story short, ended up going through a tongue tie release procedure, and then through that process, been doing myofunctional therapy as well with Lauren Kite, who's been awesome, who's also been on this podcast. So since that, it's been great. Like, I definitely have noticed improvements in both migraine frequency and migraine intensity. So I've never been able to say that before, and so it's been awesome.
That's
but
fantastic.
Yeah, I know you're interviewing me on this podcast, but I just wanted to say thanks and express my gratitude for looking at me holistically and sending me down this path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one perspective that would be interesting to get your take on, and maybe just hear your voice, is you're trained as a doctor of physical therapy, and understanding movement, the biomechanics of the body, and how we should properly function. But you yourself, having headaches and migraines, you didn't necessarily see your training as equipping you for understanding this problem and knowing how to treat it. And before I turn it over to you, just the reason I'm asking this question, there's multiple reasons here, but one of them is that people ask all the time, well, can I go find a physical therapist in my area that can do this? And oftentimes it's sort of a disappointing answer. And so I want you to speak to your experience as a physical therapist, your training, and if it touched on this at all, and why do you think it may have missed that in a sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I think back to PT school, I remember there's a section on headaches and migraines that we briefly discussed, but it was very brief and didn't really, I don't know. I remember learning kind of how digging into the suboccipital muscles can be helpful.
Yep.
things like that. Uh, it was just super brief. And then when I went and saw you for the first time, and you were talking about how, C1 and C2 and how the neck moves optimally, and like all these different sort of techniques to improve that movement that can like help headaches and migraines as a result. I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like, why aren't we teaching this in physical therapy school like heavily? If this can really help headache and migraine sufferers, like that's huge. So yeah, I would just say it was very brief, and it didn't go super in depth,
Right.
like you do. So
Yeah, absolutely. The I think that really stems from these programs, the professors. I mean, even at like healthcare systems, the upper echelons, the leading neurologists that run departments at whole hospital systems. That's where we're getting our info, and they're not looking at this, and so we're primarily seen as symptom management. So if you are going to be sent to a physical therapist, it's just like, yeah, go over some posture techniques and maybe do some suboccipital release, which is probably about the extent of what we learn in PT school.
sure.
But aside from that, and that's across the board. I mean, that's not just speaking obviously to you, Casey, and your
Yeah.
experience. I mean, yeah, having both of us two different programs, good programs, and this stuff was kind of missed. So aside from that, I want to get into your personal experience with your symptoms. Oftentimes people like to hear if what they experienced matched what you had. So where was the pain? When did it onset? That sort of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, with my migraine specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say I kind of got a variety of symptoms. One of the main kind of trademarks of mine is I will typically get an aura, which I feel like people say aura and sometimes mean different things. But for me, like that's just kind of like my vision kind of goes blurry, and it's like this blurry spot in either my left or my right eye, and that usually lasts for maybe 30 to 45 minutes, and then it'll go away, and then the migraine will kind of set in. So yeah, I guess in terms of the migraine specifically, it's usually kind of just front of my head, both sides. It's not typically not one-sided. Sometimes it's just kind of the whole head, but yeah, I would say those are the kind of the main trademarks of mine.
And did you think that your neck could have been involved? Yours was a little bit unique, and you didn't necessarily lead with, "Oh, my neck really hurts," correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as far as like shoulder tension, neck tension, what was your understanding of what was happening in those areas?
Yeah. I guess I went to see you and didn't think my neck was all that tight, but kind of found pretty quickly that my traps were super tight, and that my neck movement could definitely be improved still. And so that was one thing that we looked at right away. And then we also found, you started looking at my jaw, my mouth and jaw, which was really interesting and something I never thought of. And just found my jaw muscles and those small muscles inside my mouth were incredibly tight. And like, yeah, something I just remember you like releasing some of those muscles inside my mouth, and it was just like so tender, and you telling me that it shouldn't be that tender.
Yeah.
So that was all new to me.
Right. I remember that as well. So that's good insight. Oftentimes people come to us and they don't realize they have neck, jaw, shoulder issues at all. And
Sure.
we bring them into that reality by saying this shouldn't hurt at all. And it's pretty sensitive. So you were definitely in
Yeah.
that boat. Your jaw was definitely, it seemed to be an area that you had a high level of sensitivity. And I actually can't remember off the top of my head. Have you struggled with like jaw pain, popping, clicking in the past? Has the jaw been an area that, we've had to focus? or like
Yeah, a
in
little
general,
bit.
like healthcare,
So
like you've pursued that?
sure. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start with I had like a pretty severe underbite growing up, and
Right.
so I actually had jaw reconstruction surgery. Uh, when was that? I think winter of 2018 or 2019. Um, and so like obviously that changes a lot in your jaw, um, and so definitely have had clicking since that. Like I haven't regretted having the surgery by any means, but I've had clicking. I wouldn't really say pain, but definitely clicking and just overall tightness, which I discovered when I saw you. So
Yeah, and up to that point, no one had really mentioned anything about like tongue tie, airway. That hadn't been a part of the conversation at all.
not at all. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once we started talking about it, I think we were putting some pieces together, and you thought, oh, yeah, I do kind of struggle to breathe through my nose. Sleep isn't like the quality isn't what I'd want it to be, that sort of stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah. So that's been a whole thing as well. So I actually like I was formally diagnosed with sleep apnea because I ended up seeing a doctor and was like, I'm tired all the time. Why am I tired all the time? And so we had a home sleep study done, and he was like, yeah, this is pretty like this is moderate to severe sleep apnea. Like it was very uh, evident, and so um, yeah, definitely like breathing is something I never really looked into all that much. And then after seeing you and after working in myofunctional therapy, I have changed like a ton of stuff of how my tongue rests. Um, I now try to keep it on the top of my mouth versus letting it sit on the bottom of my mouth. Uh, and I'm also taping my mouth at night and wearing a nasal strip to try and like breathe through my nose, which has just been like a total game changer in getting better sleep uh, and like just feeling better generally. It's been awesome. So yeah, I guess this all started by like just seeing you and like diving down all these routes and discovering like trying to like you said fit all these pieces together about my past and uh, what all went what all like was going on with my jaw and mouth and breathing and all of that. So uh, yeah, it's been really interesting and impactful so far.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's important for people to hear your story because it's I talk about our three spoke framework, which I bring up every now and then, but essentially the first spoke is the neck, jaw, shoulders, us physically working on it, taking away any reason for pain to be sent to your head or the face. The second spoke in that is developmentally how did and one of those major things is like airway. How did your airway develop? Can you breathe properly? Are you sleeping, getting good quality sleep? And then the third is systemically, like diet,
Okay,
hormones, stress levels. And so
cool.
that second category is what kind of popped up when we were trying to problem solve because we were working on you and
Mm-hmm.
you had seen some relief, right? But
Yeah,
it felt like it was more stubborn than it should be. And so we kind of dug in and said, why is this not responding? And that's when we found the tongue tie. So talk about the
yeah.
tongue tie experience, going through that process. That's probably foreign to a lot of the listeners, but yeah, tell us what that was like for you.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the listeners probably associate tongue ties with just infants and babies and something that, you know, you get done right away. Uh, but yeah, I guess I was an adult that had a tongue tie, and apparently there are more adults that have tongue ties as well. But um, yeah, so I went to Colorado Tongue Tie Center, I believe it's called, and it was a really quick procedure. They basically just numb it up. You don't have to go to sleep for it, but they numb it up and use a laser. I believe I didn't see it because I wasn't looking at it, but they told me they use a laser and just basically kind of release the tongue tie. And yeah, it was super quick. I remember they have you like right after they release it, they have you kind of test the mobility of your tongue and see how far kind of the tip of your tongue can go back in your mouth. And so the first time I did that after they released my tongue tie, I was like amazed that the tip of my tongue could actually touch my uvula, which is like way back there and something that I wasn't even close to being able to do before. So yeah, it was really interesting. It felt a little strange, but it was really quite a quick procedure, and went super smooth. So, and then I guess the recovery from that was like soft foods for a while, but it really wasn't too severe, and you kind of just let it heal and you're good to go. So
Yeah, that's great. And so what I want to do now is transition from your journey and providing you with, I guess we acted kind of as your coach to say, okay, we've tried this. There's some things here, but we need to add to it tongue tie, myofunctional therapy. And then we're starting to connect the dots, finding that relief we're looking for. I think as Novera Headache Center in name as a center, we do want to act as people's coaches, understanding all these other problems and then referring out when it's appropriate. So I think you're a good example of that. I also want to now switch gears and talk about you as a runner and building this running platform. We do have a lot of patients that, and even listeners on this podcast that I'm sure are on a spectrum of like they want to run, and maybe headaches or migraines are a barrier for them running, or maybe they're avid runners and that's sort of a way that they feel it energizes them and they can relieve some of their symptoms that way. But I know you have a lot of good tips and tricks for runners in general. And so when we were talking the other day, we got coffee and it was, let's talk about ways that we can reduce stress on the neck and shoulders when we run. And if you haven't hopped on Instagram, we did a collaboration recently with a little video, and I would encourage listeners to check that out. But I want you to talk about first your own journey of how you got into like building this platform about running, and then we'll talk about some tips and tricks for people that may be looking to get into running and trying to do that the right way.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think my personal start with running was around 2017, which was kind of towards the beginning of physical therapy school for me. But yeah, I thought it was pretty simple. I thought you just kind of put some shoes on and go run, which to an extent it is, but I ended up facing multiple challenges. I ended up getting about every injury in the book, was just feeling like really fatigued and burnt out. And so I ended up kind of just reaching this crossroads of like, do I continue trying to figure this out, or do I just like give this up entirely and go do something else? And so I chose to kind of nerd out on it. I just started reading some books, started reading some research on running, and just trying to figure out how to train optimally and while avoiding injury at the same time. And so part of what this entailed was getting my run coach certification from UESCA. I think it's United Endurance Sports Coaching Association, I believe. But yeah, their whole certification looks deep into research and like how to apply that research to coach runners. And so I ended up kind of applying what I learned from that and what I was learning in physical therapy school to my own running, which I found eventually helped me quite a bit. And so I started running injury-free. I've been injury-free for almost 5 years. Ran a marathon, which was something that I never really thought I would do. And then I guess around 2020 was when I started to kind of coach other runners that were starting during the pandemic. Everyone was just kind of bored and didn't know what to do. So I did what anyone would do in 2020, and that's create a TikTok page and set up a virtual coaching system to assist runners, and yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. So been doing that ever since.
That's fantastic. Let's get into. I see one of the major issues with runners, and especially if a listener knows that running is a trigger for them, and it could even be a delayed thing. You go on a run and then, hours to the next day you get a headache or a migraine. I think a lot of it is this, I think you called it vertical displacement. Is that right?
Yeah, vertical oscillation displacement.
Vertical oscillation, yeah. So that up and down motion when you run. Our head weighs 10 to 12 pounds. Our necks, we're going to assume if we have headaches or migraines, they're not functioning as well as they should, not as stable. And so like putting them through that up and down motion over and over again, maybe part of the problem. So let's talk about that. What are some ways that we can problem solve, whether it's like changing their running stride or what are some things that runners can think about?
Yeah, so as you just said, vertical oscillation, it's kind of like that up and down bobbing movement experience while running, which like some of is totally normal, but it can be excessive. So there can be too much of it. And so another word for that is bounding. So it's just when you're hopping kind of from one foot to another and like you're really like almost jumping up and down.
Like ticker.
And so, obviously that probably isn't the best for your head and neck. So a couple things I think of that can help with that. And one of them is potentially increasing your running cadence. So cadence is how many steps per minute you take while running, which usually I hesitate to give out like a black and white number that someone should shoot for. But if I had to, I think shooting for at least 160 steps per minute, 165, probably even better, is kind of a good benchmark to go off of if you don't have anything else. So yeah, that's something that can definitely be helpful. It takes a while to learn how to do that. Like it definitely feels weird right away. One thing that can help is if you can download a metronome app to your phone and then sort of set the desired cadence to what you want and then practice running to the beat while you listen to the metronome. So obviously you don't want to do that forever. You don't want to just listen to that beeping sound forever, but it is a way to sort of learn how to establish that higher cadence. Additionally, a cue that I really like to avoid bounding is just to imagine that there's a ceiling like right above your head and avoid hitting your head as you run. So pretty self-explanatory, but combining those two things can be helpful to fix that bounding sort of gait.
Yeah, I love that. I'm wondering if there are certain songs with, you said 164 to 165 steps.
Yeah, 160 to 165. Yeah.
160 to 165. I wonder if there are certain songs that have that same rhythm as opposed to a metronome. Is that something you've explored at all? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it is. There's whole playlists on Spotify actually.
Okay.
With like specific cadences. Yeah, that you can just like run to the beat to. So that's that's a great tip. I haven't looked at that in a while, but last time I checked, there's like specific playlists for each cadence number. So definitely a good option.
Yeah. Okay. And then outside of that, I do think stress on shoulders, and then maybe a third thing is posturing. So the angle that someone's running at, the angle of their spine, I guess, and then also stress on the shoulders. So like what are they doing with their arms? Can you speak to those two things?
Yeah. So posture wise, a lot falls into place just by focusing on the cue of run tall. So I mean, that's really self-explanatory. Just run tall. Like a lot will fall into place when you do that down the chain. Everything will kind of just oftentimes naturally fall into place. So that's a really good one. Helps to keep the head and neck in more of like a neutral position versus letting your head droop forwards or staring down at your feet. And so, yeah, running tall, I would say is big. And I'll add to that a slight forward lean is totally fine while you run, with the caveat being that the forward lean should come from your ankles rather than your hips. So it's a pretty subtle difference, but if you do have a slight forward lean from your ankles, that's all good. So, and then in terms of shoulders, I would say it's really easy to run tense and just to like, especially as you fatigue and tire out, it's easy to let your shoulders come up to your ears and like your fists start to clench and things like that. And so one thing to remember is just to relax. Pretty straightforward as well, but just to relax. And then a specific cue for the shoulders and the arm swing in general that I like is to imagine that your forearms are like saws and they're sawing like parallel to the ground. And so you can do this if you're like alone right now. You can just practice. So your forearms are like saws sawing parallel to the ground, and that sawing motion should come from your shoulders and not like from your arms, if that makes sense. So your shoulders should be down and relaxed, and then just providing that energy to saw your forearms back and forth. So yeah, I think a lot of form stuff kind of falls out of place when fatigue sets in, so towards the end of a run. So especially towards the end of the run, just to be mindful of like maintaining these principles and concepts of running form that are good is can be helpful.
Yeah, as far as general principles for someone that is not currently running or hasn't ever really been a runner, but they're wanting to get into it. Maybe they currently have headaches or migraines, and so there's some consideration of like shoulder tension, neck tension. Are there general principles for an individual just wanting to start running? Meaning, is it just start slow? Is there a certain percentage that maybe you should increase your mileage? Like, what are general principles to avoid injury when just sort of starting?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it there already. Like, the biggest thing I would say is just to start small. Okay. There's kind of a assumption that with a lot of non-runners today that like they're like, man, I'm not a runner. I can't go out and run for 3 miles at whatever pace. But like that's not what running has to look like by any means. So a lot of the ways runners that I work with start is just by like, it's just like a long walk, and then you're intermixing short running bouts like within that walk. So that can be 30 seconds to a minute long, and then you're doing that like 3 to 4 times. And so I think that's a really like easy way to start running and sort of build into it. And then, yeah, for someone, especially who has headaches and migraines, you can do that and kind of monitor how you're feeling after each session and then progress based off of that. So maybe next time you would do 5 bouts of 1 minute running bouts. Maybe the time after that you'd do 3 bouts of 2 minutes and just sort of go from there. So yeah, I think kind of just reframing how you view running, and not so that it doesn't have to be this like really miserable experience of just consecutive running as fast as you can for the whole time. Doesn't need to look like that, and you can really break it down and start quite small. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think this will be extremely helpful for specifically a runner. But the encouragement that I want to pull out of this, one, your individual story, you're a physical therapist, you're active, you're coaching runners. And so health-wise, like, you check all the boxes. Even going through our process, we ran into some barriers, and then we were able to push through. And so eventually we got to where we needed to go, and we found the solutions. And then when it comes to runners in particular, we can we can look at the physical stresses on our body and try to reduce those through these tips and tricks, which is also fantastic. So thanks so much, Casey, for being on the podcast. Were there any other thoughts before we kind of wrap it up and I give you opportunity to share how people can connect with you?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I think I'll just give a plug for running. And just like, if you're looking for a way to get into exercise, I think it's an awesome route to go. It's for everyone. So if you don't think you can be a runner, I bet you probably can. So yeah, that's my plug.
Awesome. And where can people interact with you?
Yeah. My username for platforms is R4U coaching. So that's like lowercase r, the number 4, and then the letter U, coaching. I'm on Instagram is my main one, and then I'm on TikTok as well. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And then you do coach people from all over, correct?
Correct. Yep. All over the world. Yep.
Yeah. And do they go to your Instagram in order to interact with you in that way, or is there a website or something?
Yeah. So the main way I'm working with runners right now is through my app, and so you can find the link to that on my social pages. Yeah, there's the link to that is there, and then inside the app there's a bunch of different programs, and then obviously access to myself for questions and to help find the right program and things like that. So yeah.
Well, good deal. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Headache Doctor podcast. Thank you, Casey, for this valuable information and sharing your personal story. As always, it's our mission on this podcast to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. We'll see you next week.